The morning sun on Eretz 7 was soft and golden, the kind of light that made everything look warm and safe. The colony sat in a wide green valley, surrounded by low hills covered in strange purple grass that swayed gently in the wind. About 12,000 people lived here. They were farmers, engineers, doctors, and teachers. They had left Earth years ago to build something quiet and good on this little world at the edge of human space. Yoon Tae-ho stood on the porch of the security building and watched the colony go about its day. He was a big man in his late 50s, with gray hair cut short and deep lines around his eyes. He had been a captain in the Earth Navy once, a long time ago. He had seen battles and lost friends and carried wounds both inside and outside his body. When he retired, he came to Eretz 7 because he wanted peace. They gave him the job of head of security, which mostly meant settling arguments between farmers about water rights and making sure the power grid stayed online. Across the main road, the colony school sat in a patch of open ground with a small garden around it. Baek Soo-min had brought her students outside for a science lesson. She was in her early 30s, slim, with kind eyes and a voice that could calm any crying child in seconds. She loved teaching. She loved these children. There were 43 of them today, ages 5 to 14, sitting in the grass while she showed them the strange flowers that grew only on this planet. A boy named Kang Do-yoon, 7 years old, held up a bright blue flower and asked why it glowed at night. Soo-min smiled and began to explain about the minerals in the soil, when the sky above them cracked open with a sound like thunder. Everyone looked up, the clouds split apart, and through the gap came ships. Dozens of them. They were dark and angular, covered in sharp edges and strange symbols that no one in the colony recognized. They descended fast, blocking out the sun, casting long shadows over the valley. Tae-ho heard the sound and was already moving. He grabbed his communication device and called Han Ji-suk, the young communications officer who worked in the colony's small signal tower. Ji-suk was 25, thin, and nervous by nature, but he was smart and fast with technology. Ji-suk, what is that? Tae-ho said into the device as he ran toward the center of town. Unknown ships, sir. I count at least 40. They are not responding to any hail. Their signatures match nothing in our database. Ji-suk's voice was shaking. Wait, I am getting a partial match. Sir, these are Horath Dominion vessels. Tae-ho's blood went cold. Everyone in human space knew the name. The Horath Dominion was a military empire that had conquered over a dozen species across the galaxy. They were insectoid beings, tall and armored, with sharp limbs and no concept of mercy. They did not destroy civilizations. They broke them. They took what mattered most and used it to force surrender. The first Horath dropships hit the ground at the edge of the colony. The doors opened and soldiers poured out. They were over 2 meters tall, covered in dark natural armor, and they moved with terrifying speed. They carried energy weapons that hummed with a deep, ugly sound. Tae-ho activated the emergency alarm. The sound echoed across the valley, a long wailing siren that every colonist knew meant danger. He began directing people toward the underground bunkers that had been built beneath the colony for emergencies no one ever expected to actually happen. At the school, Soo-min heard the alarm and saw the ships. She did not freeze. She did not scream. She grabbed the nearest children by their hands and began pulling them toward the school building. Inside. Now. Everyone inside. Stay together. Do not stop. The children ran. Some were crying. Some were too scared to cry. Soo-min counted them as they went through the door. 43. All of them. She led them down the hallway to the basement shelter, a reinforced room with thick walls and a heavy door. She pushed them inside, checked one more time that every child was there, and then she closed the door. She locked it from the outside. She stood alone in the hallway. She could hear the Horath coming. Heavy footsteps, the sound of walls breaking. She picked up a fire extinguisher from the wall and held it like a weapon, knowing it would do nothing against armored aliens twice her size. The Horath burst through the school entrance. 3 soldiers, massive and terrifying. They saw Suman standing alone. One of them made a sharp clicking sound that might have been laughter. They stunned her with a single shot. She fell to the floor, unconscious. Then they found the basement. The lock meant nothing to them. One soldier tore the door off its frame with a single pull. Inside, 43 children screamed and held each other in the dark. The Horath took them all. In the signal tower, HFY worked with desperate speed. The Horath were jamming all frequencies, filling every channel with noise. But HFY was clever. He found a tiny gap in the jamming, a frequency the Horath had overlooked, and he pushed a signal through it. It was short. He did not have time for more. 6 words reached the nearest Earth Navy relay station before the signal died. Colony Aerith 7 attacked. Children taken. Help. Then the jamming closed the gap, and everything went silent. The Horath finished their work quickly. They stripped the colony of fuel, food, and technology. They left behind a small garrison of soldiers to maintain control. They loaded their captured hostages onto transport ships. Suman and a handful of other adults were taken for labor. The 43 children were taken for leverage. To the Horath, this was routine. They had done it many times to many species. Take the young, and the adults always surrendered. When the ships lifted off and disappeared into the sky, Tejo walked through the ruins of the colony toward the school. The building was half destroyed. The garden was crushed under alien blueprints. He walked through the broken hallway and found the basement door torn from its hinges. The room was empty. On the floor near the door, he found a small shoe. It belonged to Kang Do-yoon, the boy who had held up the blue flower and asked why it glowed. Tejo picked up the shoe and held it in both hands. His jaw was tight. His eyes were dry, but burning. He stood there in the silence of the empty room for a long time. Then he spoke, quietly, to no one. They have no idea what they have done. The flagship of the Horath Dominion was called Varagol's Fist, and it hung in orbit above their throne world like a dark iron mountain floating in space. It was 6 kilometers long, covered in weapon platforms and armored plates, and it had been the seat of military power for the Horath for over 300 years. Inside its War Council chamber, General Vorath Senek reviewed the results of the Aerith 7 operation. Senek was old, even by Horath standards. His natural armor had darkened with age to a deep black, and his 4 eyes moved slowly and carefully, missing nothing. He had commanded the Dominion's military forces for 40 years. He had conquered 14 species. He had never lost a war. He sat in his command chair like it was a throne, and listened to his aide read the report from Aerith 7. Resources seized, colony infrastructure secured, garrison left in place, adult prisoners taken for labor, and 43 juvenile humans taken as leverage for future negotiations. Senek waved one clawed hand. Standard results. Filed a report. Moved to the next campaign target. His aide hesitated. General, the intelligence division notes that the humans managed to send a distress signal before we completed the communication blackout. One signal from one small colony, Senek said, his voice deep and clicking. It changes nothing. The humans are a scattered species, farmers and builders. They will send diplomats. They will ask for their young back. We will make demands. They will accept. This is how it always works. He turned away from the report and began studying maps of his next target system. The matter of Aerith 7 was already forgotten. He could not have been more wrong. 18 light-years away, the distress signal from Aerith 7 arrived at an Earth Navy relay station. It was fragmented, corrupted by the Horath jamming. It was flagged as priority and forwarded through military channels to the United Naval Command headquarters in Seoul, on Earth. It landed on the desk of Lieutenant Cha Min-ho at 3 in the morning. Min-ho was 26, sharp-faced, and he had been working the night shift in the intelligence division for 6 months. He almost missed the signal in the flood of routine data, but something about the source coordinates caught his eye. Eretz 7 was a civilian colony. It had no military presence. There was no reason for a distress signal from there. He ran the signal through decryption. Most of it was noise, but 6 words came through clean. Colony Eretz 7 attacked. Children taken. Help. Min-ho stared at the screen. He read the words 3 times. Then he pushed back from his desk, grabbed his jacket, and walked straight to the office of Admiral No Eunji. Admiral Eunji commanded the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet. She was in her mid-40s, with a face that looked like it had been carved from stone, and eyes that gave away nothing. She had earned her rank through 20 years of service, and the people under her command both respected and feared her. Behind her back, the fleet called her the Silence Before Thunder, because she never raised her voice before she destroyed something. Min-ho knocked on her door at 3:15 in the morning. She was still awake, still working. She always was. Lieutenant, this had better be important. Admiral, Eretz 7 has been attacked. Horath Dominion. They took children. 43 children. Eunji put down the report she was reading. She looked at Min-ho. Her expression did not change, but something in her eyes shifted. Something that made the young lieutenant take a step back without meaning to. How many children? She asked. 43 confirmed, Admiral. She was silent for 10 seconds. Then, she picked up her secure communicator and called the United Earth Council. What happened next moved faster than anyone in the galaxy would have believed possible. Within 4 hours, the United Earth Council held an emergency session. Representatives from every human colony, every nation-state, every territory were connected. The vote was unanimous. For the first time in over a century, the Council authorized an unrestricted military response. No limits on force, no limits on range, no diplomatic delay. Within 8 hours, Admiral Eunji was given command of a combined task force. 4 carrier groups, 62 warships, 12,000 Marines, and the 9th Special Operations Division, the most elite and dangerous soldiers humanity had ever produced. Within 12 hours, every major news channel across human space was broadcasting the same story. Children taken, colony attacked, and humanity responded the way it always did when someone touched its children. Not with debate, not with division, not with careful political calculation, with a single, unified, burning rage that crossed every border, every language, and every difference that had ever divided them. Recruitment offices across human space were flooded with volunteers. Retired soldiers came out of retirement. Civilian cargo ships offered to join supply convoys. Engineers worked through the night to prepare warships. It was not patriotism. It was not politics. It was something older and deeper than either of those things. Admiral Eunji stood on the bridge of the carrier Indomitable and addressed her fleet before departure. Every ship in the task force heard her voice. She spoke calmly and without emotion, but every word landed like a hammer. They took our children. We are going to get them back. Every single one. And then we are going to make sure no one in this galaxy ever considers doing this again. That is all. 62 warships, thousands of crew, and 12,000 Marines, all moving toward Horath space at maximum speed. It was the largest military mobilization humanity had launched since the Unification Wars, and it had been assembled in less than a day. Across the galaxy, species that monitored human communications picked up the chatter and watched with confusion. Some watched with curiosity. A few, the ones who knew humans well, watched with something close to pity for the Horath. Far away, on a cold Horath military station, Suman sat in a small gray cell. The walls were metal, the air was cold, and smelled wrong. Through the wall, she could hear the children crying. They were scared and alone, and they wanted their parents. Suman pressed her hands against the wall, as close to them as she could get. She closed her eyes and began to sing softly. It was a lullaby her mother had sung to her when she was small. A simple Korean melody about the moon watching over sleeping children. Her voice was thin and tired, but it carried through the walls. One by one, the crying stopped. The children listened. And in that cold and terrible place, surrounded by aliens who saw them as nothing more than tools, 43 children fell asleep to the sound of a familiar song. Suman kept singing until her voice gave out. Then she sat in the silence and waited. She did not know that help was coming. But somewhere deep inside her, in the part of her that had stood alone in that hallway with a fire extinguisher against an alien army, the War Council chamber of the Horath Dominion was built to make visitors feel small. The ceiling rose 30 meters above the floor, supported by pillars of dark stone carved with the names of every species the Horath had conquered. The room was cold and dim. General Senek sat at the far end on a raised platform, surrounded by his senior officers, looking down at anyone who entered like a predator watching prey walk into its den. Diplomat Rishan walked in without fear. She was Valesi, a species known throughout the galaxy for their intelligence and neutrality. She was tall and thin, almost 2.5 meters, with smooth silver skin that glowed faintly with soft blue light. This bioluminescence was natural to her species and changed with their emotions. Right now, it was calm and steady. She had been sent by the Galactic Concord, an assembly of over 200 species, to mediate the situation before it became a war. Rashan had studied humans for 30 years. She had lived among them. She had eaten their food, read their literature, attended their festivals, and watched their children play in parks on 3 different worlds. She understood them better than almost any non-human in the galaxy. And when she had received the report about Aerith 7, she had come here as fast as she could, not to save the humans, but to try to save the Horath from what was about to happen to them. Senek greeted her with the minimum courtesy required by diplomatic protocol. He was not interested in mediation. He saw no need for it. The Concord's concern is noted, he said, his deep voice echoing in the chamber. But this is an internal Dominion matter. The human colony was in contested space. We acted within our rights. The situation will be resolved through standard negotiation. Rashan stood in the center of the chamber floor, looking up at him. General, I appreciate your confidence, but I must ask you some questions about the specifics of the Aerith 7 operation, if you will allow it. Senek waved a claw. Ask. Your forces took prisoners during the raid. Can you confirm how many? Senek looked at his aide, who checked a data screen. 61 total. 18 adults taken for labor processing. 43 juveniles taken as leverage assets. Juveniles, Rashan repeated. You mean children? They're young, yes. Standard protocol. We have used this method on every species we have brought under Dominion control. It is efficient. The adults of any species become very cooperative when their young are in our care. Rashan nodded slowly. Her bioluminescence had not changed. But those who knew her species well might have noticed that her light had become very, very still, like a person holding their breath. General Senek, she said, and her voice was careful and clear. I need to confirm something. The 43 juveniles your forces took from Aerith 7. Those were human children, correct? Yes, human young. As I said, standard leverage protocol. Senek leaned forward slightly, irritated. Why do you keep repeating this? It is not complicated. Rashan was quiet for a moment. Then her bioluminescence dimmed. Not slowly, not gently. It dropped like a light being switched off. Her silver skin went almost dark. In the chamber, Every Horath officer noticed. Some shifted uncomfortably. They had never seen a Valesi do that before. "General," Rashan said, and now her voice was different. The diplomatic smoothness was gone. She sounded like someone delivering very bad news to someone who did not yet know they were dying. "Did your forces abduct human children?" Senek stood. His 4 eyes narrowed. "You are testing my patience, diplomat. I have answered this question 3 times. Yes, we took their young. It is what we do. Every species responds the same way. They weep, they beg, they sign whatever treaty we put in front of them. This conversation is over." "It is not over," Rashan said. She did not raise her voice, but something in her tone stopped Senek from speaking. "General, I have spent 30 cycles studying the species you have just provoked. I came here not to negotiate on their behalf, but to warn you, because I do not believe you understand what you have done." The chamber was silent. Every officer was watching. "The Horath Dominion has conquered 14 species using this method," Rashan continued. "The Morvan, the Chelis, the Dravok. You took their young, and they surrendered. But those species are not humans." She began to walk slowly across the chamber floor, her dim glow casting faint shadows. "The Morvan are a hive species. They produce thousands of young per cycle. The loss of a few dozen is painful, but survivable for them. The Chelis bond weakly with their offspring and grieve briefly. The Dravok calculated the cost of war against you and chose submission as the logical path. Every species you conquered made a rational decision to accept your terms rather than fight." She stopped walking and looked directly up at Senek. "Humans will not make that decision. They are incapable of making that decision. When it comes to their children, humans do not calculate. They do not weigh costs. They do not consider odds. Something in their biology, something ancient and deep, takes over. Every adult human considers every human child to be under their personal protection. Not just the parents. Their entire civilization." Senek's officers were murmuring now. He silenced them with a sharp click. "I have seen their history," Rashan said. "Every force in their past that harmed children was met not with negotiation, but with total destruction. They have a phrase for it. They call it the point of no return. You have crossed it, General." She pointed toward the ceiling, toward space, toward the approaching fleet that Senek had not yet fully understood. "The fleet coming toward you right now is not a diplomatic escort. It is not a show of force designed to bring you to the negotiating table. It is the largest military force humanity has assembled in over a century, and it has one mission: recover those children. It will go through your station. It will go through your fleet. It will go through anything you put in its path. And it will not stop until every single child is back in human hands." Rashan's glow slowly returned, but it was cold now, pale and sharp. "You did not take hostages, General Senek. You triggered something that cannot be stopped. I came here to give you this one chance to return the children before that fleet arrives. Because after it arrives, there will be no more chances." The chamber was completely silent. Senek stood on his platform, his 4 eyes fixed on the Valesi diplomat. For the first time in 40 years of command, his claws were trembling. He turned to his intelligence chief. "Show me the human fleet, now." The holographic display activated. It showed the approaching human armada, 62 warships, 4 carrier groups, thousands of fighters, 12,000 Marines, moving at maximum speed, arriving within hours. His officers stared at him. The room smelled like fear. "Recall the outer defense fleets," Senek said quietly. "All of them." Rashan watched him give the order. She felt no satisfaction. She had tried. She had warned him. But looking at his face, she knew it was already too late. Not because the fleet was too close, but because Senek still believed he could fight this. He could not. No one could. Not when human children were on the other side of the battlefield. She turned and walked out of the chamber without another word, her silver light flickering like a candle in the dark. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace like a wall of steel appearing from nothing. 62 warships, arranged in perfect battle formation, filled the space around the Horath military station. The 4 carriers sat at the center, each one a fortress of metal and fury, surrounded by cruisers and destroyers and fast attack ships that moved with the precision of a single mind. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral No Inji stood with her hands clasped behind her back and watched the Horath station grow larger on the main display. It was a massive structure, a military platform bristling with weapon emplacements, and surrounded by a defensive fleet of over 30 Horath warships. Impressive by any galactic standard. Inji was not impressed. She nodded to her communications officer. Open a channel, all frequencies, every language in the galactic database. The channel opened, and her voice went out across every radio band, every wavelength, reaching every ship in the system, every station, every listening post for light years around. This is Admiral No Unji of the United Earth Navy. You are holding 43 human children. You will return them unharmed. You have 1 standard hour to comply. If a single child is hurt, there will be no further communication. There will be no terms. There will be no mercy. This is your only warning. She cut the channel and sat down in her command chair. 1 hour passed. The Horath did not respond. General Senek had recalled his outer defense fleets, doubling the number of ships around the station. He had activated every weapon on the station itself. He had positioned his forces in a layered defensive formation that had held against 6 different species in past wars. He was afraid, though he would never admit it. But he was also proud, and pride told him that the Horath Dominion did not surrender to farmers. The hour ended. Unji did not make another announcement. She simply looked at her tactical officer and said one word: begin. The Battle of Horath Station started at 1400 hours, Galactic Standard Time, and it was over in less than 3. The human fleet hit the Horath defensive line with a violence that shocked every species monitoring the battle. Human ships did not fight the way the Horath expected. They did not maintain safe distances or follow predictable patterns. They charged. Destroyers raced forward into point-blank range, pouring fire into Horath cruisers. Fighters launched from the carriers in swarms so thick they darkened the stars, diving into gaps in the Horath formation and tearing ships apart from the inside. A human cruiser named the Guangzhou took a direct hit that destroyed its port engine and killed 30 crew members. It kept fighting. It turned its remaining weapons on the nearest Horath destroyer and did not stop firing until the enemy ship broke apart. A squadron of fighters led by a pilot named Park Yuri flew straight through the defensive fire of 3 Horath battleships to knock out a weapon platform that was threatening the carrier group. 2 of the 8 pilots did not come back. The other 6 did not slow down. The Horath had never seen anything like it. They were disciplined soldiers and experienced fighters, but they fought wars of calculation and control. The humans were not calculating. The humans were not controlled. There was something in the way they fought that went beyond training and tactics. It was raw. It was furious. It was the fighting of a species that had been pushed past every limit of reason and restraint. But the real mission was not happening in space. While the battle raged, a single stealth transport detached from the carrier Indomitable and drifted silently toward the underside of the Horath station. Inside were 200 soldiers of the 9th Special Operations Division, led by Commander Quan Dowan. Dowan was in his early 40s, built like he had been assembled from stone and muscle and silence. He spoke rarely. He was not the kind of soldier who gave inspiring speeches. He was the kind of soldier who walked into impossible situations and walked out carrying the people he came to save. The transport docked against a maintenance port on the station's lower hull. Do-won's team cut through the outer shell in 90 seconds and entered the station. They moved through the corridors in 4-person fire teams, fast and quiet and utterly without mercy. Every Horath guard they encountered was neutralized in seconds. There were no warnings given, no chances offered. These soldiers knew what was at the end of these corridors, and nothing in the galaxy was going to stop them from reaching it. Inside the station, Suman had felt the shaking when the battle started. The walls vibrated, the lights flickered. She heard distant explosions and the screaming of metal under stress. She did not know what was happening, but she knew it was violent and close. She had spent the days of captivity preparing the children as best she could. She had organized them into groups. She had taught the older ones to help the younger ones. She had told them stories and played games and kept their minds busy so that fear did not eat them alive. She had given them every bit of strength she had, and she had kept none for herself. When the station shook hard enough to crack the walls, she gathered all 43 children into the most solid room she could find, a storage area with thick walls and a heavy door. She barricaded the door with metal shelving and supply crates. Then she found a broken metal pipe on the floor, picked it up, and stood between the door and the children. She was exhausted. She had barely eaten. Her hands were shaking. But she stood there with that pipe and waited, because she was the only thing between those children and whatever came through that door. Do-won's team reached the holding area in 11 minutes. They cored the corridor, stacked up on the door, and breached it. The door flew open. Suman swung the pipe with everything she had. Do-won caught it in one gloved hand. He looked at her, she looked at him. She saw the Earth Navy insignia on his chestplate. She saw a human face behind the visor. She dropped the pipe. Her legs gave out, and she would have fallen, but Do-won caught her arm and held her steady. He let go of her gently, then removed his helmet so the children could see his face. He had a broad face, tired eyes, and the kind of expression that somehow made you feel safe just by looking at it. He knelt down so he was at the children's eye level. "Hello," he said softly. "My name is Do-won. I am here to take you home." For a moment, there was silence. Then a small girl in the front row, no older than 5, walked forward and grabbed his hand with both of hers. And then the crying started. Not the scared crying of the last several days. This was different. This was the sound of children who had been holding their breath for days, finally letting go. Do-won picked up the little girl with one arm and spoke into his communicator with the calm voice of a man who had just completed his mission. Package secured. 43 children, all accounted for. Begin extraction. The children were escorted through cleared corridors to the docking point, where evacuation shuttles were waiting. Do-won's soldiers surrounded them in a protective ring, weapons out, eyes scanning every direction. The children walked in a line, holding hands, with Suman at the back, counting them over and over. As they passed through the corridors, they walked by rows of Marines who had secured the route. Every Marine they passed snapped to attention. These were some of the hardest, most battle-tested soldiers humanity had ever produced. Men and women who had fought in wars across 3 star systems. Many of them were crying behind their visors. The shuttles launched from the station and flew back to the fleet. The battle in space was already ending. The Horath fleet was broken, scattered, retreating in every direction. Senec had ordered a full withdrawal. His flagship was already gone, jumping to hyperspace, leaving behind the burning wreckage of his station defense force. On the Indomitable, Unji watched the shuttles dock. She listened to the report come through her earpiece. 43 children recovered, all alive, all safe, not one lost. She closed her eyes for 3 seconds. When she opened them, her expression was the same as always. Calm, controlled, unreadable. But her hands, clasped behind her back where no one could see them, were trembling. The shuttle doors opened on Aerith 7, under the same golden sunlight that had been shining the morning the children were taken. The colony had been partially rebuilt in the weeks since the raid. The Horath garrison had surrendered without a fight the moment news of the battle reached them. The colonists had repaired what they could, cleared the rubble, and then they had gathered at the landing pad and waited. Every single person in the colony was there. 12,000 people standing in silence, watching the sky, barely breathing. Yun Teho stood at the back of the crowd. He had not slept properly since the day of the raid. He had coordinated the rebuilding. He had organized the colony's recovery. He had done everything that needed to be done, because that was who he was. But he had not allowed himself to feel anything yet. He had kept it locked away, like ammunition he could not afford to spend. The shuttle landed. The engines powered down. The ramp lowered. The first child stepped out into the sunlight. A boy, maybe 8 years old, blinking and squinting and looking around with wide, confused eyes. Then a girl behind him, then another, then more. They came down the ramp in a line, holding hands the way Suman had taught them, the older ones helping the younger ones. The silence broke. Parents ran forward, mothers and fathers who had spent days and nights staring at empty beds and uneaten meals and small shoes left by the door. They crashed into their children like waves hitting the shore, falling to their knees, pulling them close, holding them so tight it seemed like they would never let go. The sound of crying filled the air, but it was good crying, the kind that comes when something broken is finally put back together. Kang Doyen, the boy who had held up the blue flower on the morning of the raid, walked down the ramp and found his mother in the crowd. She grabbed him and held his face in both her hands and looked at him as if she was memorizing every detail. He looked up at her and said, "The teacher kept us safe, Mom. She sang to us every night." Suman came down the ramp last. She walked slowly, one step at a time, like her body was running on nothing but willpower. She was thin and pale and her eyes had dark circles under them. But she was upright. She was walking. Teho pushed through the crowd to reach her. When he stood in front of her, he bowed. It was a deep, slow bow, the kind that carried the weight of everything he could not say out loud. Suman shook her head. She reached out and took his hand. "They were so brave," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Every single one of them. They were so brave." Teho squeezed her hand and nodded. He did not trust himself to speak. 6 weeks later, Admiral No-NG stood at a podium in the great assembly hall of the Galactic Concord. The hall was enormous, a curved amphitheater that could hold representatives from over 200 species, and today every seat was filled. This was the most watched event in galactic history. Every species that had access to communication technology was listening. Yunji wore her dress uniform. It was simple and dark, with no decorations except her rank insignia. She looked small behind the podium in that vast room, surrounded by beings 3 times her size, species that had been traveling between stars when humans were still learning to make fire. She did not look small for long. "We are not a warlike species by nature," she began. Her voice was steady and clear, and it carried to every corner of that silent hall. "We build farms, we teach children, we write poetry, we cook meals for each other, and argue about which way is the best way to prepare rice. We would rather grow things than destroy them." She paused. "But our children are sacred to us, not as resources, not as assets, not as leverage. They are the reason we exist at all. They are every hope we have and every future we dream about, carried in small bodies that trust us to keep them safe. She looked across the assembly. Hundreds of alien faces looked back at her. Some she recognized. Most she did not. It did not matter. She was not speaking to any one species. She was speaking to all of them. What happened at Aerith 7 will not happen again. Not to our children, not to anyone's children. The Horath Dominion's practice of taking young ones as hostages ends today. If it does not end by their choice, we will end it by ours. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. This is not a threat. It is a promise from our entire species, and we always keep our promises. The hall was silent for a long time after she finished. Then, one by one, species began signaling their agreement. A light here, a sound there, a raised appendage, a bowed head. It spread across the assembly like a wave, until the entire hall was unified in a single response. Within 1 month, the Galactic Concord passed the Aerith Accord, a universal law banning the taking of juvenile hostages of any species. Enforceable by coalition military action. Humanity was invited to lead the enforcement body. They accepted. On the Horath throne world, General Senek sat alone in a bare room. He had been stripped of his rank, his title, and his command. The Horath ruling council had not punished him for losing the battle. They had punished him for starting a war that the Dominion could not win, against an enemy that would never stop. He sat in the dim light and stared at a holographic image on the small table in front of him. It was a frame captured from the station's security footage during the rescue. It showed a human child, a small girl, maybe 5 years old. She was being carried down a corridor by a human soldier, her arms around his neck, her face pressed against his shoulder. Senek had studied the image for hours. He was trying to understand the expression on the child's face. It was not fear. It was not relief. It was not even happiness. It was trust. Complete, total, unshakable trust. The absolute certainty that the arms holding her would not let her fall. That someone had come for her. That someone would always come for her. Senek had conquered 14 species. He had broken empires and forced civilizations to kneel. But he could not understand that expression. He could not understand a species that would mobilize its entire military, risk thousands of lives, and fight with suicidal fury to recover 43 small, fragile, helpless beings who could not fight, could not work, could not contribute anything of strategic value. "What are these creatures?" he whispered to the empty room. No one answered. Months passed. The galaxy settled into a new normal. The Horath Dominion pulled back from human space entirely, and began the slow, painful process of renegotiating their place in a galaxy that no longer feared them the way it once had. The Aerith Accord was enforced. Other species, emboldened by what humanity had done, began pushing back against old injustices. Something had shifted. Something permanent. On Earth, in a small coastal village in the south of Korea, Sumin sat on the porch of her parents' house and looked out at the sea. The sun was setting over the water, painting everything in shades of gold and pink. She held a cup of tea in both hands and listened to the waves. Her communicator buzzed. She picked it up and found a video message. It was from the children of Aerith 7. They had recorded it together, all 43 of them, standing in the rebuilt school garden with the purple grass and the strange blue flowers blooming around them. They sang her a song. It was the lullaby she had sung to them in the dark, in that cold cell on the Horath station, when they were scared and alone, and she was the only thing standing between them and despair. They had learned all the words. The little ones stumbled over the Korean syllables, and the older ones helped them, and it was messy and off-key, and absolutely perfect. Sumin watched the video. She smiled. She cried. She watched it again. The waves kept rolling in. The sun kept setting. The world kept turning the way it always did. And across the galaxy, In 100 languages, on 1,000 worlds, a new proverb had taken root. It was whispered by diplomats in quiet hallways. It was taught to soldiers on their first day of training. It was written into the laws of civilizations that had never even seen a human face. 3 simple words that carried the weight of an entire species behind them. Do not touch their children.